talking to you from Indiana in the United States. Pronunciation. Let's talk about pronunciation. Talk some more about pronunciation. Now, we all agree pronunciation is important. Why? Why is pronunciation important? Well, for the simple reason that we need to be understood. No understanding, no communication, right? You can know a lot of grammar, you can know a lot of vocabulary, but if your pronunciation is terrible, people will not understand you. Therefore, your grammar becomes useless. Your vocabulary becomes useless. So we absolutely need good pronunciation. Not necessarily perfect pronunciation, but good, right? Clear pronunciation. And that's why you want to speak English with a standard, clear accent. Why? So for example, a standard, clear North American accent. Why is that important? Well, because these standard accents, the standard pronunciation, is the most understood everywhere in the world. The most easily understood because it's the most common. So if you're living in England, you want to speak with a clear North American accent or a clear standard British accent. Because both of those accents are very easy for most English speakers to understand, and certainly very, very easy for most native speakers to understand. And those are really the two most common. Yes, Australia has a standard accent, of course, and other places that speak English, but in the internet and media, mostly what we see are either the North American accent, the standard North American accent, or the standard British accent. North American accent is probably the most common, simply because the United States is much bigger and has a much larger economy, more media, etc. The British accent would be second. So, if you can speak with one of those accents clearly, then everybody will understand you. That's why it's important. Well, the next thing is, what's the problem? Why do people have trouble with pronunciation? I mean, that's a good question, right? I mean, we should think about the problem first. Think like a doctor. First, we have to diagnose, right? We have to decide what the illness is. What is the disease? We know the disease is bad pronunciation. Well, what causes that disease, right? I mean, think about it. Why? Why? Why do so many English learners around the world have terrible pronunciation? Maybe you have terrible pronunciation. So why is that? Well, I think the number one reason is that most students learn English in school, and we have to be honest, most English teachers in schools have bad pronunciation. I'm talking about not in the United States, not in Britain, but in other countries where English is not the main spoken language. Most English teachers have really bad pronunciation. I have seen this myself. I've seen it in Thailand. I've seen it in Japan. I've seen it in Korea. And I've heard from my students in many, 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 many other countries who say the exact same thing. For example, students in Vietnam who complain that their English teachers in their schools have terrible, terrible pronunciation. So it makes sense. The students are hearing terrible pronunciation as they learn the beginning of the language. They're hearing their Japanese English teachers or Chinese English teachers or whatever. It's every country in the world, really. They're hearing their teachers speak very, very badly. And then they hear this pronunciation, and that's what they learn. They learn that same terrible pronunciation. They just don't hear the standard accents enough as they learn. So this is the main problem. Now, I'm not attacking those teachers. Some of those teachers really want to help. But really, those teachers should work on their pronunciation. And this is one reason that having native speakers as teachers or as coaches, even just online like me, is so important because it gives you that clear pronunciation. You get to hear how to pronounce things correctly and clearly so that people will understand you when you speak English. Very important. And it's the same, by the way, if I'm learning Spanish, well, I want to hear native Spanish speakers, right? Because when I learned the beginnings of Spanish in high school, for example, in high school, my Spanish teacher had a terrible accent. She had a southern United States accent. So she spoke Spanish with a weird gringo southern accent, so I heard all kinds of terrible Spanish pronunciation. And only later did I improve my pronunciation somewhat by listening to native speakers, mostly from Spain. All right, let's go. Let's go forward. One more point about the problem. A second problem in schools and English classes around the world is that in many classes, probably most, they don't teach pronunciation at all. So number one, you have teachers that are speaking badly. But also, even with native speakers sometimes, for example, in conversation schools in different countries, you might have someone from the United States teaching, or Canada, or wherever. But often, I'd say usually, even the native speakers don't specifically teach you pronunciation. In most schools, in most classes, you don't study pronunciation. You don't practice it in a disciplined way, in an organized way, right? Mostly they're teaching grammar and somewhat vocabulary. But that's it. So this is another problem, because the truth is pronunciation needs training. You can improve your pronunciation through simply listening, kind of in a indirect way. But to really have good, clear pronunciation, you actually need to have some focused, organized pronunciation training. And again, most schools simply don't do that. So, there's our problem. Okay, we see the clear problem, so what's the solution, right? Well, how do you do it? How do you teach yourself, train yourself, because you're an independent learner now. So you don't need to worry about the schools. You don't need to constantly think about all the problems with the schools. You are the boss now. You're the boss of your own learning. And that's good news. And even better news, you can train yourself to be understood every time you speak English, to have great, clear pronunciation. And that gives you a lot of confidence when you speak, when your pronunciation is very clear. And other people, they will look at you differently. When you have good, clear pronunciation, people think that you're advanced. Even if your vocabulary and grammar is not so advanced, you still feel more advanced to them. So that's good. Okay, the question then, how do we do it? How do we do it? So we have to think about this. Pronunciation is a little different than vocabulary and grammar, and even just fluency. Because pronunciation is very much a physical skill. It's a physical skill, meaning good pronunciation depends on using the muscles in your mouth, your face, your throat correctly, in the right way. And these are small little muscles, and they're very tiny little movements to create the different sounds of speech. And so when you're trying to pronounce things differently in English, in a different language, you've got to train those muscles in your face and throat and mouth and your tongue, all of that. You've got to train those muscles. It's kind of like learning to play the piano or the guitar. You know, part of learning the guitar is you have to train your fingers to move, to make the correct notes. And you got to train them to do it faster and faster and faster until eventually you can move those fingers, both hands, very quickly and effortlessly, automatically. Then you become a good guitar player. Or you can play a song very well, but it takes a lot of training, and a lot of it is just training the muscles. And of course, part of training the muscles, you're also training your brain at the same time, right? Because it's your brain that controls the muscles.